Captain John Smith strode onto the bridge of the UNS Defender, his heavy boots clanking against the metal deck. The crew snapped to attention as he made his way to the command chair, the stars streaking by on the view screen behind him. "At ease," he growled, settling into his seat. "What's the situation, Lieutenant?" "Sir, we've received an urgent distress call from the Melissan," replied the comms officer. "They say they're under attack by the Vespid Dominion and request immediate assistance." Smith frowned. The Melissan were a peaceful race descended from highly evolved bees. They were known for their advanced honey production and intricate hive cities that sparkled like golden jewels across their verdant homeworld. The Vespids, on the other hand, were a ruthless empire of wasp-like aliens bent on galactic conquest. "The Melissan asking for our help?" Smith shook his head in disbelief. "They've always viewed humanity as too aggressive, too warlike. Why would they turn to us now?" "Desperate times, sir," said the lieutenant. "The Vespids have already overrun several of their outlying colonies. The Melissan say they have no one else to turn to." Smith leaned back, considering the situation. Humanity had a complicated history with the other races of the galaxy. Their rapid technological advancement and expansionist tendencies had earned them a reputation as a young, brash, and dangerously unpredictable species. Many of the older, more established civilizations viewed them with a mix of fear and disdain. The Melissan, in particular, had always kept humanity at arm's length, preaching the virtues of peace and diplomacy over military might. But now, faced with an existential threat, it seemed even the pacifistic Melissan were willing to set aside their reservations and ally with the aggressive humans. "Very well," Smith said at last. "Set a course for Melissan Prime, maximum velocity. Let's show these Vespid bastards what happens when you mess with our friends." As the Defender leaped into hyperspace, Smith couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. For too long, humanity had been viewed as the galaxy's troublemakers, their warnings about the need for a strong defense falling on deaf ears. Now, with the Vespids on the march, the other races were finally starting to see the value in the human way of doing things. It was a bitter vindication, but Smith would take it. "Lieutenant, get me everything we have on the Vespids," he ordered. "I want troop numbers, ship capabilities, battle tactics. The works. If we're going to kick these bugs back to their hive, we need to know what we're up against." "Aye, sir," the lieutenant replied, his fingers already flying across his console. As the information began to scroll across the screen, Smith felt a familiar thrill run through him. The rush of impending combat, the chance to put his skills to the test against a worthy foe. He knew many of his fellow officers felt the same way. They were warriors bred for battle, and the prospect of a righteous fight set their blood singing. But beneath the adrenaline, there was a deeper sense of purpose, a conviction that went beyond mere bloodlust. Smith and his crew were fighting for something greater than themselves, for the safety and freedom of all sentient beings, regardless of their shape or origin. The Melissan might look down on humanity's aggressive tendencies, but when the chips were down, they knew who to call. The humans would answer that call, as they always had, with courage, determination, and the indomitable spirit that had carried them to the stars. As the Defender hurtled through the void, Smith allowed himself a small smile. The Vespids had no idea what they were in for. They thought they could roll over the peaceful races of the galaxy unopposed, but they hadn't reckoned on the tenacity of humanity. "We're going to give these bastards a war they won't soon forget," Smith muttered under his breath. "And when it's over, maybe the rest of the galaxy will finally see us for what we are. Not just a bunch of hot-headed upstarts, but the guardians of peace and justice in a hostile universe." He settled back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the view screen as the stars streaked by. The Melissan might have been content to sit back and let the Vespids walk all over them, but that wasn't the human way. Being peaceful was all well and good, Smith reflected, but sometimes, when the stakes were high and the enemy was at the gates, you had to be willing to fight for what you believed in. And if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was fight. The Vespids were about to learn that lesson the hard way, and Smith couldn't wait to be the one to teach it to them. As the Defender raced towards its rendezvous with destiny, Smith felt a sense of calm settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he and his crew would face them head-on, with the courage and tenacity that had made humanity the rising power in the galaxy. The Vespids might have the numbers and the firepower, but they lacked the one thing that truly mattered in war, the unbreakable will to win. That was the human edge, and Smith intended to use it to the fullest. "Hold on, Melissan," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "The cavalry is on its way, and this time we're not just here to talk. We're here to kick some serious ass." With those words, Captain John Smith settled in for the long journey ahead, ready to lead his ship and his crew into the heart of the storm. The Vespids had started this war, but by God, the humans were going to finish it. And when the dust settled and the smoke cleared, the galaxy would know once and for all that being peaceful was all well and good. But when the first shots were fired and the fate of worlds hung in the balance, it was the aggressive humans who stood tall and defended the innocent. That was the human way, and Smith wouldn't have it any other way. The Defender dropped out of hyperspace on the outskirts of the Melissan system, its sensors immediately lighting up with the telltale signs of battle. The once peaceful star system was now a cauldron of conflict, with Vespid warships swarming like angry hornets around the beleaguered Melissan defenses. "Status report," barked Captain Smith, his eyes scanning the tactical display. "Multiple Vespid capital ships detected, sir," replied the sensor officer. "They've got the Melissan completely outgunned. Their hive cities are taking a beating." Smith gritted his teeth. The situation was even worse than he'd feared. The Melissan, for all their technological prowess, were no match for the sheer brutality of the Vespid war machine. "All right, people, let's show these bugs what human ingenuity can do," he growled. "Helm, bring us in full attack velocity. Weapons, I want a firing solution on the nearest Vespid battleship yesterday. It's time to even the odds." The bridge crew leaped into action, their hands flying over their consoles as the Defender surged forward, its engines flaring with power. The sleek human warship sliced through the chaos of battle like a scalpel, its advanced stealth systems rendering it all but invisible to enemy sensors. "We're in range, sir," reported the weapons officer. "Locking on target. Fire at will," Smith commanded, his voice cold and hard. The Defender shuddered as its main cannon unleashed a searing lance of energy. The beam cut through the Vespid shields like they were made of paper. The enemy battleship staggered under the impact, its hull buckling and twisting as secondary explosions rippled along its length. "Direct hit," crowed the weapons officer. "Their shields are down and they're venting atmosphere." Smith allowed himself a tight smile. The Vespids might have had the numbers, but they were no match for human weaponry. The Defender was a marvel of military engineering, a perfect blend of raw power and cutting-edge technology. But the battle was far from over. The Vespids, enraged by the sudden attack, were already turning to face their new foe, their own weapons bristling with deadly intent. "Incoming fire!" shouted the sensor officer. "Brace for impact." The Defender shook as the Vespid barrage slammed into its shields, the deck bucking beneath Smith's feet. But the ship held together, its defenses absorbing the worst of the blow. "Shields holding at 80%, reported the tactical officer. "But we can't take too many more hits like that." Smith nodded grimly. The Defender was tough, but it wasn't invincible. They needed to end this fight quickly, before the Vespids could bring their full might to bear. "Helm, bring us about," he ordered. "We're going to hit them again hard and fast. Weapons, I want a full spread of torpedoes right down their throats. Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine." The Defender swung around, its engines flaring as it accelerated towards the Vespid fleet. The enemy ships opened fire, their weapons stitching the void with deadly energy. But the human vessel danced and weaved through the barrage, its superior agility and speed making it a near impossible target. "Torpedoes away!" shouted the weapons officer, as a volley of shimmering projectiles leaped from the Defender's launch tubes. The Vespid ships tried to evade, but it was too late. The torpedoes slammed into their hulls, the resulting explosions tearing through their armor like tissue paper. One by one, the enemy vessels began to break apart, their crews consumed by the merciless vacuum of space. "That got their attention," Smith said with grim satisfaction. "Now let's finish the job. All hands, prepare for close-quarters combat. We're going in." The Defender plunged into the heart of the Vespid formation, its guns blazing as it tore into the enemy ships with ruthless efficiency. The Vespids fought back with all the fury of a cornered beast, but they were no match for the skill and determination of the human crew. Smith watched with a mixture of pride and sorrow as his ship carved a path of destruction through the enemy fleet. He took no pleasure in the killing, but he knew it was necessary. The Vespids had to be stopped, their cruel empire brought to heel, if there was to be any hope for peace in the galaxy. And if that meant getting humanity's hands dirty, then so be it. The Melissan might have looked down on their aggressive ways, but when the chips were down, it was the humans who had answered the call. It was the humans who were willing to fight and die for what they believed in. As the last Vespid ship exploded into a cloud of debris, Smith let out a long, slow breath. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Vespids would be back, their thirst for conquest unquenched, and humanity would have to be ready. But for now, there was a moment of respite, a chance to catch their breath and tend to their wounds. Smith turned to his crew, his eyes shining with pride and gratitude. "Well done, everyone," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've done humanity proud today. You've shown the galaxy what we're made of." The crew responded with a roar of approval, their voices echoing through the ship's corridors. They knew, as Smith did, that this was only the beginning. There would be other battles, other challenges to face, but they would face them together, united by their common cause and their unbreakable spirit. They were human, and they would never back down, never surrender, never stop fighting for what was right. As the Defender set course for the Melissan homeworld, ready to render aid to their beleaguered allies, Smith allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, full of wonders and terrors beyond imagining. But as long as humanity stood tall, as long as they were willing to fight for what they believed in, there would always be hope. And that, in the end, was what truly mattered, not the opinions of other races, not the whispers of aggression and warmongering, but the unshakable conviction that when the chips were down and the innocent cried out for help, humanity would answer the call. They were the guardians of the galaxy, the defenders of the weak and the oppressed, and they would never, ever stop fighting for what was right. With that thought burning bright in his mind, Captain John Smith settled back in his chair, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The Vespids had been beaten back, but the war was far from over, and humanity, as always, would be ready. The Defender settled into orbit around Melissan Prime, its hull still scorched and pitted from the ferocious battle with the Vespid fleet. On the planet's surface, the once gleaming hive cities lay in ruins, their towering spires reduced to rubble by the relentless enemy bombardment. Captain Smith stared down at the devastation, his jaw clenched tight with anger and sorrow. The Melissan had been caught unprepared, their peaceful ways leaving them vulnerable to the brutal onslaught of the Vespid war machine. But now, with the immediate threat repelled, it was time to pick up the pieces and begin the long, hard process of rebuilding. "Lieutenant, assemble a team of engineers and medics," Smith ordered. "We're going down there to offer whatever assistance we can. The Melissan are going to need all the help they can get." "Aye, sir," replied the lieutenant, already moving to carry out his orders. As the shuttles ferried the human aid teams to the surface, Smith couldn't help but feel a sense of grim responsibility. Humanity had answered the Melissan's call, true, but in doing so, they had drawn the full wrath of the Vespid Dominion down upon the peaceful race. The Melissan might have been spared conquest, but at what cost? Their cities lay in ruins, their people traumatized and displaced. And now, with humanity firmly in the fight, there was no telling how far the Vespids would go to crush their new foe. But there could be no turning back now. The die had been cast, the battle lines drawn. Humanity was committed to this war, for better or worse, and they would see it through to the bitter end. As Smith stepped out onto the surface of Melissan Prime, he was immediately struck by the eerie silence that hung over the ruined city. The once bustling streets were empty, the air thick with the acrid tang of smoke and ash. But then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. A Melissan, his carapace cracked and scorched, his compound eyes dull with exhaustion and grief. "Captain Smith," the Melissan said, his voice a rasping buzz. "On behalf of my people, I thank you for your aid. Without your intervention, we would surely have perished." Smith inclined his head, humbled by the Melissan's gratitude. "We only did what was right," he said. "No one should have to face the Vespids alone." The Melissan's mandibles twitched in what Smith had come to recognize as a smile. "Perhaps we were wrong about your people, Captain," he said. "We thought you too aggressive, too prone to violence. But now, in our hour of need, it was that very aggression that saved us." Smith felt a flush of pride at the Melissan's words, but he quickly tamped it down. There was no room for ego here, not with so much work still to be done. "We're here to help in any way we can," he said. "Just point us in the right direction." The Melissan nodded, his eyes gleaming with renewed hope. "Come," he said. "There is much to be done." As Smith and his team set to work clearing rubble and tending to the wounded, he couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the Melissan people. Even in the face of such devastation, they refused to give in to despair, their indomitable spirit shining through like a beacon in the darkness. It was a spirit that Smith recognized all too well, the same spirit that had carried humanity to the stars, that had driven them to explore and expand, to push the boundaries of what was possible. And now, as they worked side by side with the Melissan, that spirit was forging a new bond between their peoples, a bond of shared struggle and sacrifice, of common purpose and unwavering resolve. For the first time, Smith began to see the glimmers of a new future taking shape, a future in which humanity and the other races of the galaxy stood together, united against the forces of tyranny and oppression. It would not be an easy path, he knew. The Vespids were still out there, their hunger for conquest undiminished, and there would be other challenges to face, other battles to fight. But with the strength of their convictions and the power of their unity, Smith knew that they could overcome anything. They would stand tall, shoulder to shoulder, and face the future with courage and determination. And in the end, when the dust settled and the smoke cleared, they would emerge victorious, not just as humans or Melissan, but as something greater, something stronger. They would emerge as a galaxy united, a shining beacon of hope and freedom in a universe too often consumed by darkness and despair. As Smith looked out over the ruins of the Melissan city, he felt a sense of purpose settle over him like a mantle. This was more than just a war, more than just a fight for survival. This was a chance to build something new, something better, a future in which all races could live in peace and harmony, their differences celebrated rather than feared. And he would do whatever it took to make that future a reality, for the Melissan, for humanity, for the galaxy as a whole. The road ahead would be long and hard, but Smith was ready for the challenge. He had his ship, his crew, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity at his back. Together, they would face the Vespids and any other threat that dared to stand in their way. And together, they would emerge victorious, a shining example of what could be achieved when the races of the galaxy stood as one. With that thought burning bright in his mind, Captain John Smith turned back to his work, ready to begin the long, hard task of rebuilding. The future was waiting, and he would not rest until it was won.